You're going to see some world champion endgame technique now, but also some really alert defense. So this is round 8 of the Grenke Chess Classic, and Magnus Carlsen's playing with white against Nikita Vitiugov, strong Russian player who doesn't get that many opportunities to play in the West, but well, he's shown so far in this tournament that he fully deserves to be there. Both players have a chance still to win the tournament. So after 40 moves, Magnus with white, you can see he has a very nice pawn structure, everything regular, everything nicely protected. Vitiugov's pawns are a little bit ragged, that one potentially weak, these ones isolated, but he does have everything protected so far. But so far, well, it's moved 40 and he's withstood Carlsen's probing and poking very well indeed. But this is just the kind of position that Magnus likes. He has a positional advantage and he can play this one for hours, and he did. So rook here, so that's a nice move, just hitting this pawn and also preparing to bring the bishop to c5 to make that rook look really silly. Bishop g3, this is actually a very strong move. We'll see why in a second. So bishop c5, so you can see that black's rook, well, at the moment doesn't have any decent squares to head to. And white has a couple of plans here. One might be to bring the king round to take that pawn. Another plan could be to play b3 or b4, and then after this is taken, to advance the king into black's position, and then to indeed attack the rook. But Vitiugov defends very well. He starts to create counterplay on the king side. Now let's try one of those plans. So let's try b4. Okay, this is taken. So the king can come in, but now black creates counterplay on the other side of the board. So it looks dangerous, but actually black is fine in this position. Now if Carlsen had time to bring this rook round and gain control over here, but it's just too late. Well, just only by a move. It's pretty close. Rook h8, you need to be able to play a check. And then the white king will come in, but black gives a check first. And actually, black is fine here. There's simply no way through for white's pieces. And it's been simplified as well. And black's rook is nice and active. So that one doesn't work. Okay, what about bringing the king round? Well, this is just too slow. Again, black creates counterplay on the king side, and h4 is still possible there, but rook g6 is even better. White's king march is just too slow. Well, black threatens to create a passed pawn here, and the h pawn is really dangerous, so that gets taken. But now you can see that black can take the pawn on e4. So this counterplay on the king side is quite significant and well spotted by Vitiugov. So instead of one of those plans, Magnus played bishop b4. So he's brought his bishop round, and now he can free the rook. Once this pawn is advanced, you can see these pawns, well, they're just a little bit vulnerable, so it's time to bring the rook round. So g4, good move. So before black takes here and creates a strong passed pawn, then of course Carlsen exchanges and then brings the rook round. So now he's got another target. It's funny how these things happen. So the position is just changing very slightly, and Magnus takes advantage of that. So the king comes back. So black is very passive, and Carlsen just keeps it like that. So keeps the rook tied down to defending c7. But it's still not clear what white is doing. What's next? Well, the next thing is to bring this king over here and play g3 and dislodge the bishop from this position where it's defending the e-pawn. So the king comes around. Oh, by the way, if bishop a5 looks pretty good, but in fact Black has counterplay here. White wins a couple of pawns, but now it's Black's turn. Check. And you take the g-pawn. And I think it's quite clear from this position that this far advanced passed pawn is going to give Black, well, let's just say excellent counterplay. I personally, I wouldn't even risk that with White. Therefore, King d1 instead, so you can see that that bishop controls the d6 square, so the rook still can't activate properly. Vitiugov is just waiting. He can't do anything else but wait in this position. And that's quite scary. You know, there's always a dilemma when you're defending. Do you defend passively or should you be playing more actively? But Vitiugov decides to defend passively for the moment. So Carlsen just activating his rook a little bit. He still has an option to check and take that pawn if the rook were to move. But the rook is just a little bit more active on the d file. And now he comes over to drive away the bishop. A little counter attack here and a little trick. Rook d1. So if that pawn is taken, then the bishop is trapped. So therefore, after rook d1, the bishop goes back to g5. No harm done. Now the king comes back again. So the king has performed its duties on the king side and now comes back where it might be needed on the queen side to defend this pawn when white activates. So for the moment, Vitiugov waits, and this rook activates again. So the position has just changed very slightly, and so he's shuffled the pack just a little bit, and now the rook swings back, hoping that having just taken the bishop away from defending that pawn, maybe things are just a little bit different now. So all these pawns are isolated. That's the scary thing from Black's viewpoint. Vitiugov trying to activate his rook. Perhaps on a good day you might be able to come down here, but that one is shut out. And rook b6. So nothing has changed really. Rook h7. And now I think it's actually still okay to defend with the rook from c6, but perhaps he felt that, you know, it was too risky to wait like that. And instead, Vitiugov played rook b7. And this was played on move 58, 2 moves before the time control. So a slightly critical moment for Black to change his defensive position. But let's see what he has in mind. So Magnus moves the king back to the queen side, and then he'll be able to activate that bishop. Whether that's significant or not, it's hard to say, but it's some kind of progress. But here's Vitiugov's plan. So instead of keeping the rook in this very passive place on c6, his idea is to activate the rook. And it's very clever. Threatening rook down here, possibly rook d3 as well, looking at that g-pawn. So what happens on rook takes pawn? Check. And we have a very similar endgame to the one that we just saw a few moves ago. This g-pawn is simply too close to touchdown, and white's pieces are just across on the other side of the board. Black must be fine there. Although white is a pawn up, remember you can only push one pawn at a time. So back to this position. So instead of taking on c7, Magnus played rook g7. Rook check. Critical moment, but they have reached the time control. So both players could just take a little bit more time here. 15 minutes added to the clock. Magnus had a huge time advantage actually, but Vitiugov was down, yeah, he was down to a couple of minutes when he reached the time control of move 60. But anyway, he has 15 minutes more, so he could work things out carefully. Now, it looks a bit odd to play the king back in the line of the bishop, but actually Magnus realizes this is fine. I think it's possible to play bishop e3 here, but instead Vitiugov goes for clarity. He plays bishop f6. He found this move very quickly, played it very quickly. He'd obviously foreseen it. It's an excellent move. Well, it looks a bit odd to leave the rook on prise, but well, let's see what happens. So first of all, the obvious move. What about rook takes g4? Well, in this case, and there's a couple of moves, you can just play rook d8. And you can see that white's rook is actually trapped here. It's not getting out at all. Although black can't win the rook, it's just impossible for white to make progress in that position. You could also play rook h2, is very similar actually. And if rook g8, then the rook comes back here, and we can take this off, and material is even again. And well, it's probably quite pleasant for black in some ways with a center pawn. And if king d1 to stop that, then king f7 keeps the rook trapped on g4. It's very similar to rook d8. So that's what happens after rook g4. Basically, black can keep the rook penned in. And what about rook takes c7? Well, again, we have that variation where the g pawn drops. So that's no good. So basically, in this position, Magnus decided enough was enough, and he acquiesced to the exchange of rooks. And of course, in this position with even pawns and no way through, well, bishop endings are notoriously even actually, or notoriously drawish, and that's certainly the case here as well. Nothing really to attack, no way through for the kings. Well, I think Nikita Vitiugov did extremely well to hold that, actually. We've seen on so many occasions how Magnus succeeds in grinding his opponents down, massaging the position and somehow getting somewhere, but not today. So that leaves the scores after 8 rounds with Fabiano Caruana on 5.5. 2 players in second position, Carlsen and Vitiugov, both on 5, half point behind. With just 1 round to go, last round pairings very interesting. Carlsen has black against Anand. Well, of course, he's going to try to play for a win. That's just in his nature. But not easy with black against Vichy, who is very solid. Even though he's not having a great tournament, not an easy proposition for Magnus to win that one. Then the real crunch encounter. We have Vitiugov, white against Caruana. So that is going to be really interesting. So any of those 3 can win. Caruana, Carlsen, Vitiugov. And I think all bets are off at this stage. Anything could happen. Well, thanks for watching. And do check out the info button up there, where you'll see more further playlists of Carlsen and other interesting games, and also check out the video description and you'll see lots of links for playlists that we have on the channel. We've got lots and lots of material, over 1,000 videos that we've put together and posted over the past few years, so do check those out if you've got some spare time. Thanks very much for watching.